Hello and welcome to Auspex Tactics, the Imperial-focused 40k tactics channel, where we're dedicated to helping you purge Xenos and heretics across the battlefields of the 41st millennium. In this video we'll be talking about the new Space Marine Eliminator squad, including their stat line, war gear options, special rules, some combos and how I'd personally run them on the tabletop. So, Eliminators then. They're a heavy support unit for the new Space Marine Codex. You buy them as a squad of 3 models, 1 sergeant and 2 regular eliminators. They have the standard Primaris Space Marine stat line, movement 6, weapon skill and ballistic skill 3 up, strength and toughness 4, 2 wounds, 2 attacks, leadership 7 and a 3 up save. The sergeant has a leadership of 8. Each model comes with a bunch of war gear options. They have a bolt pistol, bolt sniper rifle, frag and crack grenades, and every model has a camo cloak. They have a couple of war gear options, including to trade out their bolt sniper rifle for las fusiles, and the sergeant can trade out his bolt sniper rifle or las fusil for an instigator bolt carbine. The bolt sniper rifles have a bunch of different ammo options that they can choose to shoot at the opponent. They have 3. So first of all we have the executioner round. That's 36 inches, heavy 1, strength 5, AP -1 and damage 1. Now this one has a bunch of special rules. Firstly, you can shoot at characters even if it's not the closest unit, much like any sniper rifle. You add 2 to the hit roll, and the target doesn't receive the benefit of cover to its saving throw. The second is the hyperfrag round. This can target characters as well. It has a range of 36 inches, it's a heavy D3 weapon, strength 5, AP 0, damage 1. And the last and, in my opinion, the best round is the mortis round. Again, range 36 inch, heavy 1, strength 5, AP -2, but damage D3. That can target characters again, and when resolving the attack, any wound roll of a 6 or more inflicts 1 mortal wound on the target in addition to its other damage. A bolt sniper rifle eliminator or eliminator sergeant costs 24 points, so a squad of 3 of them will be 72 points. The las fusil, their anti-tank war gear option, costs an extra 12 points on top of that, so that will put them at 36 points, meaning a squad will cost you 108 points for 3 las fusil eliminators. The las fusils have another range of 36 inches, they're heavy 1, strength 8, -3, damage 3 weapons. The instigator bolt carbine for the sergeant, that's a 24 inch assault 1 weapon that's got a strength of 4, AP of -1 and damage 2. This costs 26 points when it's on the eliminator sergeant. Now you might be wondering why it costs more points than the bolt rifle despite being obviously inferior, and that's because it's got a special rule. It's called covering fire. The first time this unit's eliminator sergeant fires overwatch with the instigator bolt carbine in your opponent's turn, this unit can, after it's resolved overwatch, move as if it was the movement phase. So this is really quite a powerful buff, to be honest, because it means that when your opponent tries to charge the eliminator squad, they can essentially fall back and make the charge a lot harder to do. So their movement's 6, so it will make the charge 6 inches harder if you move them directly away from your opponent. Now that's particularly brutal if your opponent wants to deep strike and charge you, because you have to set up 9 inches away when you deep strike in next to a unit, and then if they move 6 inches away, then it will make the charge completely impossible. So it can be quite frustrating if your opponent wants to tag these guys in close combat from a unit coming in from reserve. So aside from that, they have a few special rules. Their camo cloaks, as with scouts, they basically add 2 to their saving throw when they're in cover instead of 1. So in cover they will essentially have a 1-up save, although a 1 always fails. This means they'll be a little bit more resistant to high AP weapons, so say an AP2 weapon, that would still only have them saving on a 3-up, as their cover is that much improved. The eliminator sergeant has a special rule called guided aim. This gives them the option of, instead of the sergeant shooting in the shooting phase, the other eliminators in the squad, when they shoot, will add 1 both to their hit rolls and to their wound rolls. I've done the maths for this, and usually it makes sense to use this ability rather than having the sergeant fire an additional weapon of the same type at most targets. So for example, if you have some las fusil eliminators taking aim at a rhino, if the sergeant uses his guided aim ability, then they get an average of 1.4 wounds with their weapons on the rhino. If all 3 fire their las fusils at the rhino, then they get an average of 1.3 wounds on the rhino. so it's generally better for the sergeant not to shoot. This effect becomes even more pronounced when you're using the mortis rounds for the bolt sniper rifle, which in my opinion are the best things that you can use with the unit. Because the mortal wound ability triggers on a 6+, then every wound roll of 5 that you roll for the unit will result in a mortal wound when the sergeant uses his guided aim ability, and this really makes the mortis rounds excel far above most other options. And their final ability is ability called Concealed Positions, which is the same as, say, the Scouts and the new Invicta Warsuits get. Basically, they can set up in deployment anywhere 9 inches away from the enemy, so they don't actually have to set up within their own deployment zone. I'd say that I'd usually want to keep these towards the back of my forces, because they're not particularly good in close combat, and they've got quite a decent range, so they're not exactly going to need to be right up in the face of the opponent. I generally want to set them up in my deployment zone, or maybe on a high ruin somewhere in no man's land, but certainly not right up in the enemy's face where they can do a lot of damage to these guys. So, with those few options, how would I set up my unit of Eliminators? I think there's a few viable builds that you can use with them. Firstly, you give all 3 bolt sniper rifles. That's the cheapest way to field them, giving you a 72-point unit. Most of the time, like I said, the sergeant shouldn't be firing, so you'll get 2 shots with a +1 to hit and +1 to wound against all targets. The second option is to swap out that squad sergeant for the Instigator bolt carbine, which I think can be worth it if you want to have the utility of them having that 6-inch fallback move from when the opponent tries to charge them. The third option is to give them las fusils. If you're going to give them las fusils, I'd only ever give 2 of them las fusils and leave the sergeant with the far cheaper bolt carbine. You get the advantage of being able to run away, and like I said, he's usually not going to be shooting anyway, he's usually best off guiding his squad. So that means you can save a few points while still equipping the 2 boosted las fusils on the other guys, and that will make the unit cost 98 points in total, rather than the 108 it would be for giving the sergeant an otherwise useless las fusil. Okay, so that's the basic squad. So essentially they're a 3-man sniper or las fusil unit who will sit at the back of the board and have +1 to hit and +1 to wound when you're using most weapons. So how do they fit into your army, and what other ways are there to boost their damage output? First of all, I'm going to say that I don't think that it's going to be worth supporting these guys with characters unless it's really convenient for your list. You could have a captain or a lieutenant sat with them, and that will certainly help them, but they're quite small units to bother trying to get into a captain's aura, and you might be best off trying to save that bubble of reroll ones for one of your bigger units or bigger tanks. They're also a bit small of a unit to be bothering to use any psychic powers or chaplain chance on. You can, however, crank up their damage and survivability quite a lot by some of the chapter tactics that we have available to us. Now there's 3 really standout chapter tactics in my book. First of all, Raven Guard. They get -1 to hit when their infantry units are in cover, and they get +1 to hit and wound characters from their Super Doctrine trait. Now as you can see, this is going to quickly get very silly when you're getting +2 to hit and wound every single character. This has a very, very high potential damage output against things like knights and tank commanders and demon princes and virtually anything else that your opponent has that has the character keyword. I'd say that these guys are actually one of the main arguments for taking Raven Guard as your overall chapter tactic, because they're just that good with it. My second pick is Salamanders, or the Master Artisan's successor trait. I really can't say enough how much that this reroll of 1 hit and 1 wound will buff the damage output of these Eliminators. They basically hit the sweet spot where the squad has enough shots that you're usually going to have 1 miss to reroll a miss, and enough wounds to reroll 1 wound, but not so many shots that 1 hit or 1 wound doesn't really matter in the scheme of things. Say, for example, if you reroll 1 bolter shot on a tactical marine squad, no one's really going to care. Say, for example, if you're taking aim at a Space Marine chapter master or captain, then you'd be hitting on 2s and wounding on 2s, and you're not likely to get 2 1s in either one of those, so if you do happen to get one of those dice results to be a 1, then you can re-roll it with the chapter tactic. And my third choice for the chapter tactics that best suit these guys would be Iron Hands. Iron Hands have a 6-up Feel No Pain save, which is actually really quite good on Primaris bodies, because it means that any damage to weapons are that much less likely to kill a marine in 1 shot. because you have 2 chances of making that feel no pain save and that Marine surviving on 1 wound. As well as this, their super doctrine essentially allows them to move and shoot with heavy weapons with no penalty, and they also get to re-roll 1s for their heavy weapons when they make a hit roll. Now this is great because it means that you could deploy your Eliminators out of line of sight on turn 1, and then when it's your turn you can move them forward to the front of the ruins, maybe into line of sight, and shoot with no penalty, re-rolling 1s. Other potential chapter tactics that you can use that I don't think are quite as good would be the Ultramarines for moving and shoot when you're in the tactical doctrine, and Imperial Fists or Crimson Fists for getting extra bolter hits on a hit roll of 6. So how personally would I run these in my army? I would actually run them as a successor chapter with the Master Artisans trait, and make the successor chapter successor of the Iron Hands chapter. So this means that you get those crazy reroll hit and wounds that really spikes their damage output, and they also get the move and shoot and reroll 1s. So they're basically going to be incredibly reliable at shooting, and they also get to move, so they can start out of line of sight. I'd want to equip them with the bolt sniper rifles, and I'd be fairly happy to either take or leave the instigator bolt carbine. It's only a couple of extra points, but I don't think that its run away when the opponent charges result is actually going to come into effect in most battles. Now I'm just going to look at a few of the crazy stats that these Eliminators can put out before I leave you here today. So firstly, I've worked out that when they have the Master Artisans trait and the Iron Hands reroll of 1s, 3 squads of these with the bolt snipers firing mortis rounds will put 7 wounds on an Imperial Knight, which I think is just absolutely nuts, because Imperial Knights are not really what sniper rifles should be bringing down, but apparently they're really quite good at it. So that's 210 points for 7 wounds on Imperial Knights per turn. And if you actually turn their guns on what they're actually supposed to be good at, killing characters, then 3 units of the Eliminators with bolt sniper rifles, even with no chapter tactic buffs or anything, should on average down and Space Marine Captain when they're firing mortis rounds each turn. So unless your opponent wants their characters all to be dead, then they need to put them out of line of sight of these guys. So with all that said, I think that the new Eliminators are going to be a highly competitive unit. We're going to see them a lot in tournaments, and they're going to make a lot of characters very unhappy and dead on the battlefields of the 41st millennium. If you like this video, then I've also done a similar style review of the new Primaris Invicta Warsuit, and I'll leave a link in the description below if you'd like to check that one out. I think that my next review will probably be on the new Impulsor, which looks like a very interesting transport for intercessors and hellblasters. And if you'd like to see that, then don't forget to subscribe to Auspex Tactics. Thanks for listening, and hopefully I'll see you again in the next video.